He conquered much of Europe, but Napoleon Bonaparte's strongest weapon was never his army. It was debt. Cannons could win battles, but credit was what built empires. And in the early 19th century, Napoleon learned to command both. This is the rarely told story of how a general who inherited a bankrupt nation transformed France's shattered finances into a financial machine whose logic still shapes modern economies today. Long before Wall Street or global financial institutions existed, there was Napoleon's financial system. France did not enter the 19th century as a dominant power. It entered as a financial ruin. The revolution had torn the country apart, destroying the monarchy, dismantling the aristocracy, and more critically, destroying the money itself. By the middle of the 1790s, France had printed such massive quantities of paper currency, known as assignats, that they had almost no value left. At one point, an entire house in Paris could be purchased for the cost of a single loaf of bread when paid in assignats. Inflation erased trust, and trust is the foundation of every financial system. When Napoleon took control in 1799, he inherited a nation that was bankrupt, exhausted, and despised by creditors. The population longed for stability above all else. Napoleon understood something most revolutionaries failed to grasp. Power does not come from weapons alone. It comes from money people believe in. So he set out to rebuild that belief, not purely with gold, but with discipline, structure, and control. His first move was psychological. He believed that credit was the soul of money, the invisible force that gave it life. In 1800, he founded the Banque of France, a private institution in name but firmly under his authority. It functioned as both a central bank and a tool of confidence. Its mission was straightforward: convince people that French money once again had meaning. Unlike the chaos that came before, Napoleon restrained the printing of paper currency. New money was issued with backing in silver and gold, but even more important, it was backed by his image and authority. Coins carried his face. French money became inseparable from Napoleon himself. That symbolism restored confidence. The Bank of France stabilized banknotes and managed government debt, assuring merchants, soldiers, and citizens that their pay would retain value. For the first time in over a decade, France had a functioning financial system again. But this was never just about economic recovery. It was about command. Napoleon did not want free markets. He wanted a system that answered to him. The bank served the state, and the state served war. Finance and military power merged into a single engine. War demanded enormous resources. Napoleon campaigns across Italy, Austria, Prussia, and eventually Russia required a constant flow of money for weapons, horses, food, and manpower. He did not possess unlimited gold reserves. What he possessed was something more flexible: credit. Napoleon perfected a method still used by governments today: borrow against future success. He issued government bonds with the promise that conquest would pay for repayment. Merchants and bankers purchased them, wagering on his victories. Every successful campaign strengthened confidence. Every treaty pushed bond values higher. As long as Napoleon kept winning, his wars funded themselves. It became a self-reinforcing cycle. War created debt, debt created money, money financed more war. Behind this system emerged a new financial elite. Bankers and speculators who traded on Napoleon campaigns moved gold through blockades and treated finance as a silent battlefield. Napoleon distrusted them, but depended on them. Together they built a European financial structure driven by perpetual motion, debt sustained by belief and belief sustained by expansion. Yet this system had a fatal weakness. It only worked while confidence remained unbroken. Confidence is fragile. It buys time, but it cannot replace reality. By the early 1800s, the costs of constant war began to catch up. Campaigns consumed enormous resources. Gold, silver, credit, and supplies drained faster than they could be replaced. The Bank of France, once celebrated as the stabilizer of the economy, quietly increased paper issuance beyond its backing. Each victory expanded the empire, but also multiplied obligations. Armies required feeding, territories required administration. Veterans demanded pensions. Loans had to be rolled over again and again. Tax revenues could not keep pace. Wealthy regions like Italy, Belgium, and the Rhineland were drained to sustain the war effort. The empire grew outward, but its financial core weakened from within. Napoleon had built an empire powered by confidence. But confidence cannot defy mathematics forever, and history was already preparing its response. And when those sources dried up, Napoleon did what empires always do. He took more. He dictated budgets to conquered states, ordered them to mint his currency, and forced them to purchase French goods at inflated prices. This was no longer economics. It was extraction. And like all extraction, it had limits. Britain understood those limits better than anyone. The British Navy controlled the seas, and that control meant blockade. No gold shipments, no colonial trade, no reliable supplies. France was trapped on the continent, rich in victories but poor in liquidity. Merchants could not move goods, factories could not export, the treasury could no longer balance its accounts. The debt engine began consuming itself. Napoleon did not retreat. He escalated. He tightened his grip on the economy, nationalizing key industries, personally influencing interest rates, and using his network of prefects to extract taxes with military efficiency. Church lands were seized. Enemy assets were confiscated. Wealthy citizens were compelled to provide forced loans. Resistance was treated as treason. When Austria was defeated, the objective was not just military success, but revenue. After Austerlitz, Austria was forced to pay massive reparations, enough to finance another year of war. Prussia suffered the same fate. Italian treasuries were emptied. Spanish gold flowed into Paris. Dutch merchants were taxed until commerce collapsed. Each conquest became a financial transaction. Each victory served as a temporary bailout. The conquered paid the interest. France enjoyed the appearance of wealth. For a brief period, the illusion held. Paris sparkled with new construction. Soldiers received their wages. The French franc was praised as stable once again. New stock exchanges, customs offices, and mints were built to give the system legitimacy. But beneath the surface, everything depended on confidence alone. Once belief faltered, collapse was inevitable. This was the first modern experiment in monetary imperialism. France did not rule Europe only through armies. It ruled through debt. It exported its credit system across the continent, demanding that allies borrow in French currency, use French banks, and trade on French terms. Money had become an extension of empire. Across the Channel, Britain watched closely. British leaders understood what Napoleon was constructing, and they feared it. But they also recognized its weakness. So they built an alternative. The Bank of England, founded generations earlier, became the core of a rival system based not on coercion, but on trust. While Napoleon forced nations to finance him, Britain invited investors to profit alongside her. British government bonds became the safest asset in Europe. Nobles, merchants, and even foreign rulers sent their wealth to London, confident that British credit would endure. Napoleon's system was financed by command. Britain's system was financed by confidence. That difference proved decisive. Every war France fought demanded more pressure, more borrowing, and greater faith in a single man. Every war Britain fought strengthened its institutions, markets, navy, and currency. Napoleon ruled by decree. Britain ruled by belief. The real conflict was not decided on battlefields like Trafalgar or Waterloo, but in bond markets and balance sheets. The empire that could borrow longest would survive. The empire whose paper others trusted would prevail. In 1806, Napoleon struck back economically. He announced the Continental System, a sweeping embargo designed to strangle British trade. European states under his control were forbidden from importing British goods. Napoleon believed that destroying commerce would destroy credit. But empires built on control always underestimate resilience. Britain redirected trade to the Americas, India, and Asia. Its navy protected new routes. Merchants found new buyers. Colonies filled the gaps. Continental Europe suffered instead. Without British goods, prices soared. Sugar, coffee, textiles, and iron became scarce. Ports emptied, factories closed, hunger spread. Black markets thrived. Smuggling exploded. Corruption became routine. The embargo intended to crush Britain ended up isolating France. By the next decade, even Napoleon allies quietly broke the rules. Goods flowed through neutral ports. Officials were bribed to look away. Napoleon responded with harsher enforcement, more decrees, more inspectors, more arrests. But repression only accelerated decay. The system was running on fumes. By the time the Russian campaign began, the illusion was cracking. The army still marched, but it marched on credit. Soldiers were paid in money that no longer held value. Supplies were delayed. Morale weakened. When Napoleon led his forces east, he carried not just men into the snow, but a financial fantasy. The campaign collapsed, and with it, the last confidence in the system. Paper money lost credibility. Merchants rejected government notes. The Bank of France, once the centerpiece of reform, was reduced to borrowing from private financiers to survive. The empire of debt had reached its limit. Even the army quartermasters eventually began issuing local paper notes just to keep basic trade alive. Napoleon, the man who once believed credit could never die, was now bankrupt in every sense. His empire had consumed itself from the inside. And yet, history never truly erases its architects, because even in defeat, Napoleon's financial system outlived him. When the old monarchies returned after his fall, they did not dismantle the Bank of France. They understood its power. They understood that whoever controlled credit controlled the nation. So they preserved it and refined it. The Banque of France became the blueprint for every serious central bank that followed. Its structure was revolutionary. Part private, part state-guided, it balanced political authority with financial expertise. It could issue currency, manage national debt, stabilize markets, and finance wars, all while maintaining the appearance of independence. It was the perfect contradiction, a state-supported institution that claimed neutrality while quietly serving those in power. Prussia adopted its methods. Austria studied it closely. Russia envied its efficiency. Even across the Atlantic, the young United States observed and learned. By the middle of the 19th century, nearly every major power had built its own version of this Napoleonic fusion of money and authority. But the greatest beneficiary was not France. It was Britain. The long struggle against Napoleon forced Britain to perfect its own financial weapon. While the French debt empire collapsed under pressure, Britain's debt-based system matured. By the year 1815, British government bonds were widely trusted, treated as solid as gold. The Royal Navy dominated the seas, keeping trade and tax revenues flowing. British merchants financed commerce across continents. The pound sterling became the backbone of global trade, the first true reserve currency. Napoleon sought domination through conquest. Britain achieved it through balance sheets. The pound anchored the world economy, and the Bank of England became its pulse. In a bitter irony, Napoleon financial warfare paved the way for his rival victory. His relentless use of debt forced Britain to innovate, to strengthen institutions, and to rely on systems rather than individuals. That foundation became the modern global financial order, one built on bonds, markets, and interconnected banking networks stretching from London to New York and beyond. After Waterloo, Napoleon's personal debts were immense. Unpaid suppliers, unpaid soldiers, and broken promises followed him into exile. He died on the remote island of St. Helena, surrounded by a small circle of loyal followers, dictating his memories to anyone who would listen. But his true legacy was not his battles or even his downfall. It was the architecture of money he left behind. Even in chains, his blueprint endured. The fusion of political will with financial control, the belief that nations could spend future wealth to win present wars, the idea that debt could fuel growth without limit. That belief defines the modern world. Governments borrow to sustain promises. Central banks print to prevent collapse. Nations convince themselves that debt can be managed forever, as long as confidence holds. History whispers the same warning Napoleon ignored. Every empire built on borrowed trust eventually meets the same fate. Not through invasion, not through revolution, but through silence. The silence that arrives when belief runs dry. Napoleon's rise and fall proved that money is not about numbers. It is about psychology, control, and belief. The invisible foundation of civilization. When that foundation rests on debt instead of discipline, collapse becomes unavoidable. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But always. Today, when governments create trillions with a keystroke, when economies rise on credit bubbles and political promises, when markets celebrate liquidity instead of productivity, we are not witnessing something new. We are living inside Napoleon machine. The debt system he perfected never disappeared. It simply changed uniforms, flags, and names. The Bank of France became the model for modern central banks. The pound became the model for the dollar. And the illusion that prosperity can be created from paper and trust became the creed of the modern world. And somewhere, if history remembers, Napoleon is still smiling, because the empire he could not hold by force still rules through finance. The modern banking system was not born in peace. It was born in war, on the battlefields of Europe, shaped by ambition, fear, and belief. Napoleon Bonaparte did not only redraw the map of Europe, he redrew the map of money itself. The system of central banks, endless debt, and controlled trust that governs our lives today is the empire he never truly lost. And if this gave you a new perspective, remember this: the answers are not hidden in the future, they are written in the past.